The stars look different here. Fleet Leader Vextal pressed his long fingers against the viewing port of the Harmony's edge and studied the unknown region of space. His ship had been exploring for 3 months, mapping new star systems and looking for planets that might support life. The Zephyrians were always searching for new worlds to study and new friends to meet. Fleet Leader, we are detecting something strange, called Science Commander Ithara from her station. Her voice carried the musical tone that all Zephyrians used when they were excited about a discovery. Vextal moved away from the window and walked to the center of the bridge. The Harmony's edge was built for peace and exploration. Its walls were smooth and curved, painted in soft colors that helped keep the crew calm during long journeys. There were no weapons on board, only scientific equipment and tools for making contact with new species. "What have you found?" Vextal asked. Ithara's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as she read the data on her screen. "There is a vessel drifting near the 3rd planet of this system. It appears to be damaged. The energy readings are unlike anything in our database." "Show me." The main screen flickered to life, displaying an image that made the bridge crew gasp. The ship, floating in space, was nothing like their own vessel. Where the Harmony's edge was smooth and graceful, this unknown craft was angular and harsh. Its surface was covered in what looked like metal plates, and dark scars ran across its hull. "By the 7 moons," whispered Navigator Tellith. "What kind of beings would build such a thing?" The damaged ship was roughly the same size as their own, but it looked like it had been through a terrible accident. Parts of its hull were twisted and burned. Strange objects stuck out from its surface at odd angles, and several sections appeared to be completely destroyed. "Are there life signs?" Vextal asked. "Yes," Ithara replied, her voice growing more excited. "I detect multiple biological signatures. The beings inside appear to be alive but unconscious. Their ship has minimal power, and life support systems are failing." Vextal felt his heart beating faster. First contact with a new species was always thrilling, but this situation was also dangerous. These unknown beings were in serious trouble. Inside the damaged ship, Captain Jake Sullivan floated unconscious in his command chair. The USS Liberty had been drifting for 3 days since the battle with the raiders. Most of the crew was unconscious, from the toxic gas that had leaked from the damaged life support systems. The emergency power was nearly gone, and the ship was slowly dying in the cold of space. First Officer Lisa Morgan was the first to wake up. She had been thrown against a wall during the last enemy attack, and her head still hurt badly. She pushed herself up from the floor and looked around the bridge. Sparks fell from broken control panels, and the air tasted of smoke and metal. "Computer, status report," she said weakly. "Main power offline. Life support at 15%. Hull breaches. On decks 4 through 7. Weapon systems destroyed. Communication array damaged." The computer's voice was distorted and hard to understand. Lisa pulled herself to her station and tried to restore some power. The Liberty was a warship, built for fighting and surviving in dangerous situations. Even badly damaged, it was still functional enough to keep the crew alive for a little while longer. As she worked, she noticed something on the sensors. A large ship was approaching slowly. Lisa's training kicked in immediately. Unknown vessels could be more raiders coming to finish them off. "Computer, identify the approaching ship," she ordered. Unable to comply. Design does not match any known configuration. Lisa managed to restore partial power to the main screen. What she saw confused her completely. The approaching ship looked nothing like any vessel she had ever seen. It was smooth and elegant, with no visible weapons or armor. It moved slowly and carefully, as if its crew was being very cautious. On the Harmony's edge, the Zephyrians continued to study the strange damaged ship. "Their technology is fascinating," Ithara reported. "The hull appears to be made from multiple layers of different metals. These beings know how to build things that can survive extreme damage." "But why would they need such strong ships?" asked Tellith. "What dangers do they face in their home space?" Vextal wondered the same thing. The Zephyrians lived in a peaceful part of the galaxy. Their ships were built for comfort and scientific research, not for surviving attacks. The idea that someone might need such heavy protection was troubling. Try to establish communication, Vextal ordered. Use the standard mathematical sequences. The Harmony's Edge began broadcasting simple mathematical patterns that any intelligent species should recognize: prime numbers, geometric sequences, and basic equations that showed they were trying to make peaceful contact. On the Liberty, Lisa heard the strange signals coming through the communication system. She had never heard anything like it before, but she recognized that it was some kind of message. Someone was trying to talk to them. She quickly woke up Communications Officer Brad Turner, who had been unconscious at his station. Brad was groggy and confused, but he understood the situation immediately when Lisa explained what was happening. "It's mathematics," Brad said after listening to the signals for several minutes. "Basic mathematical concepts. This is how scientists think aliens might try to communicate with us." "Are they hostile?" Lisa asked. Brad studied the approaching ship on the screen. "I don't think so. Look at their ship. It doesn't look like a weapon, and they're trying to talk to us instead of attacking." Lisa made a decision that would change everything for both species. She told Brad to respond with the same kind of mathematical signals, showing that humans were intelligent and wanted to communicate. The response from the Liberty made the Zephyrian bridge crew celebrate with joy. They had made contact with a new species, and these beings seemed to be intelligent and peaceful. "Prepare a medical team," Vextal ordered. "These beings are injured and need help. This is the most important day in our exploration history." Neither species realized yet how much this meeting would change their understanding of the galaxy and each other. Captain Jake Sullivan woke up with a terrible headache. The last thing he remembered was the explosion on the bridge when the raiders hit their weapon systems. Now he was lying in the medical bay, breathing clean air for the first time in days. "Welcome back, Captain," said Dr. Patricia Wells as she checked his vital signs. "You've been unconscious for almost 4 days. We have visitors." Sullivan sat up slowly, his head still spinning. "Visitors? What kind of visitors?" "The alien kind," Patricia replied with a small smile. "They saved our lives. Their medical supplies are keeping us alive right now." Sullivan looked around the medical bay and noticed strange equipment he had never seen before. Soft blue lights glowed from devices that seemed to be monitoring the injured crew members. The air smelled clean and fresh, nothing like the smoky, metallic taste they had been breathing since the battle. "Where's Morgan?" Sullivan asked. "On the bridge, talking with them. They've been trying to learn our languages for the past 2 days. They're very smart, Captain, and very curious about us." Sullivan made his way to the bridge, still feeling weak. What he saw there amazed him. First Officer Lisa Morgan was sitting at a table with 3 beings that looked completely different from any human. They were tall and thin, with pale blue skin and 4 eyes arranged around their heads. Their movements were graceful and careful, and they spoke in musical tones. "Captain Sullivan," Morgan said when she saw him. "Meet Science Commander Ithara, Navigator Tellith, and Medical Specialist Kotham. They're from a species called the Zephyrians." The 3 aliens stood up when they saw Sullivan. Ithara stepped forward and made a gesture that seemed like a bow. "We are honored to meet the leader of your vessel," she said in careful English. "We have learned much of your language from your computer systems. We hope we did not overstep by accessing your databases." Sullivan was impressed. In just 2 days, they had learned English well enough to have a conversation. "You saved our lives," he said. "You can access whatever you need." "Your species is fascinating," Ithara continued, "but we are confused by many things we have learned about you. May we ask you questions?" "Of course." The Zephyrian scientist pulled out a device that projected images in the air. Sullivan saw pictures of Earth, human cities, and historical events that the aliens had found in the Liberty's computer files. "Your world is beautiful," Tellith said, "but we do not understand these images. They show your people fighting each other, large groups of humans using weapons against other humans. We thought these might be entertainment programs, but your computer says they are historical records." Sullivan realized what they were looking at: wars, battles, conflicts from throughout human history. He had never thought about how this might look to a species that had never experienced warfare. Those are real events, Sullivan said carefully. Humans sometimes fight each other. We don't always agree on things, and sometimes disagreements become violent. The three Zephyrians looked at each other with expressions that Sullivan couldn't read. Thara's four eyes blinked rapidly, which seemed to indicate she was upset or confused. "But why would you hurt your own species?" she asked. "Surely talking would solve these problems better than violence." "We try talking first," Sullivan explained. "But sometimes people want things they can't have, or they believe things that hurt others. When talking doesn't work, fighting sometimes happens." Medical specialist Kotham stepped forward. "We have scanned your bodies and your ship. Your species appears to be designed for fighting. Your muscles are much stronger than ours, your bones are denser. Your ship is built like armor. Do you fight often?" Sullivan thought about how to answer that question honestly. "More often than we'd like. There are dangerous people in the galaxy, pirates, raiders, conquerors. Sometimes you have to fight them to protect innocent people. The damage to your ship," Tellith said quietly. "This came from fighting?" "Yes. We were protecting a colony world from raiders. They had better numbers, but we drove them off before they could hurt the civilians." The Zephyrians went very quiet. They whispered to each other in their own language, and Sullivan could tell they were disturbed by what he had told them. Engineer Danny Rodriguez chose that moment to enter the bridge. He had been working with Zephyrian technicians to repair the Liberty's systems, and he looked excited about something. "Captain, you have to see what these folks can do with technology," Danny said. "Their engineering is incredible. They've fixed our life support system better than it was before the battle. But Captain, I think we might have scared them a little." "What do you mean?" "Well, they were helping me repair the weapons systems, and when they realized what our guns could do, they got real quiet. I don't think they've ever seen weapons like ours before," Ithara spoke up. "Your weapons are designed to destroy other ships completely. We have never seen such powerful destructive devices. In our space, we have tools for moving asteroids and clearing space debris, but nothing meant to hurt other beings." Sullivan was beginning to understand the problem. "How long has your species been traveling in space?" "Nearly 3,000 years, Tellith replied. "We have met 17 other intelligent species in that time. All of them were peaceful, like us." "Have you ever encountered hostile aliens? Pirates or raiders?" The three Zephyrians looked confused by the question. "Why would anyone attack strangers?" Kotham asked. "When we meet new species, we share knowledge and resources. Everyone benefits from cooperation." Commander Helen Price entered the bridge at that moment. She was the Liberty's tactical officer, and she had been reviewing the ship's defensive systems. When she saw the aliens, she stopped and stared. "Captain, are these our new friends?" she asked. "I've been going over our weapon systems. The damage looks worse than it is. We could be combat ready in another day or two." The word combat made all three Zephyrians step backward. Ithara's musical voice became higher and more strained. "You are preparing for more fighting?" she asked. "Just in case," Price replied, not understanding the aliens' reaction. "You never know who might show up. It's better to be ready." Sullivan saw the fear in the Zephyrians' eyes. "Helen, maybe we should focus on repairs that get us home, not combat readiness." But the damage was done. The aliens now understood that humans didn't just fight when they had to. They were always ready to fight. They prepared for battles that might never happen. They built their entire society around the possibility of violence. "We need to contact our leaders," Ithara said quietly. "They must know about your species before we proceed further." "Are we in trouble?" Sullivan asked. "We do not know," Tellith replied honestly. "We have never met a species like yours. Our people will need time to understand what you are and whether you are safe to be around." Sullivan felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. Humanity's first contact with a peaceful alien species, and they had already frightened them. He wondered if there was any way to convince the Zephyrians that humans could be trusted, or if their reputation as warriors would make friendship impossible. The bridge fell silent as both species realized how different they really were. The Zephyrians saw humans as dangerous predators who solved problems with violence. The humans saw Zephyrians as naive innocents who had never faced real danger. Neither side knew how to bridge such a huge gap in understanding. Outside the ship, more Zephyrian vessels were approaching. Word of the strange, warlike aliens was spreading through their peaceful space, and everyone wanted to see these beings who carried weapons among the stars. 3 days later, Captain Sullivan stood in the main conference room of the Zephyrian station called Peaceful Harbor. The name made him smile sadly. Everything about these aliens spoke of peace and safety. The walls were covered in soft colors. The furniture was comfortable and gentle music played in the background. Across the table sat Fleet Leader Vextal and 4 other Zephyrian leaders. They had been asking questions about human society for hours, and Sullivan could see the worry growing in their 4 eyes. "Captain Sullivan," said Council Leader Nathara, an elderly Zephyrian with silver markings on her blue skin. "Our people are frightened. Word has spread through our colonies about your species. Some are asking if we should avoid human space entirely." Sullivan felt tired. He had been trying to explain humanity for days, but every answer seemed to make things worse. "We're not monsters," he said quietly. "We fight to protect people, not to hurt them." "But you carry weapons that could destroy entire planets," Vextal pointed out. "Your ship's computer contains plans for devices that could kill millions of beings. Why would peaceful people need such terrible power?" "Because not everyone in the galaxy is peaceful," Sullivan replied. "There are species out there who take what they want by force. Pirates who steal and kill. Empires that conquer weaker worlds. If good people don't have weapons, then only bad people will have them." The Zephyrians whispered among themselves in their musical language. Sullivan caught a few words he had learned. They were talking about death makers and violence bringers. Science Commander Ithara leaned forward. "Captain, we have lived in peace for over 2,000 years. We have met many species and all of them were reasonable. When there are disagreements, we talk until we find solutions that help everyone. Violence is never necessary." "You've been lucky," Sullivan said. "The part of space you live in must be safe. But out there," he pointed toward the window showing the stars, "there are beings who don't care about talking. They see weakness and they attack." "Perhaps," said Council Leader Nathara, "but our concern is this. How do we know that humans are the protectors you claim to be? How do we know you are not the dangerous ones?" Before Sullivan could answer, Navigator Amy Chen entered the room. She had been working with Zephyrian scientists to map local space routes, and she looked excited. "Captain, sorry to interrupt, but the Zephyrians have agreed to show us their military training programs. They want to demonstrate their defensive capabilities." Fleet Leader Vextal nodded. "We thought it would help you understand our way of handling conflicts. We have prepared our most challenging war simulation. It will show you that violence is not always the answer to problems." Sullivan was curious about what these peaceful aliens considered military training. "We'd be honored to observe." The group moved to the station's simulation center. The room was large and filled with holographic equipment that could create realistic training scenarios. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Foster and several other Liberty crew members were already there, watching Zephyrian technicians prepare the program. "This is our most difficult combat exercise," explained Military Coordinator Velthas, a Zephyrian who seemed more serious than the others. "It simulates a rescue mission in hostile territory. The goal is to save civilians while avoiding all conflict with enemy forces." The simulation began. Sullivan watched as holographic Zephyrian ships entered a dangerous asteroid field where civilian vessels were trapped. Enemy ships patrolled the area, but the Zephyrian commanders worked carefully to avoid detection. They used stealth technology and patient maneuvering to reach the civilians without being seen. It took them 3 hours to complete the rescue, and they considered it a success because no shots were fired and no one was hurt. "Impressive," Sullivan said, and he meant it. The Zephyrians had shown remarkable skill at avoiding conflict while accomplishing their mission. "Your turn," Velthas said with pride. "Let us see how humans would handle the same situation." Sullivan looked at his crew. Commander Helen Price was studying the simulation data with interest. Engineer Danny Rodriguez was examining the holographic controls. Navigator Amy Chen was plotting potential courses through the asteroid field. Are you sure? Sullivan asked. Our methods might be very different from yours. We insist, Nithara said. We want to understand human military thinking. Sullivan nodded to his crew. All right, but remember, we're soldiers. We approach problems differently than explorers do. The simulation restarted. This time, Lieutenant Commander Ryan Foster took command of the tactical display while Amy Chen handled navigation. Sullivan watched his crew work with the efficiency that came from years of training and real combat experience. Instead of avoiding the enemy patrol ships, Foster immediately identified their weaknesses. He plotted an attack route that would disable their engines without destroying them completely. Amy calculated a flight path that used the asteroid field as cover for an assault rather than hiding. Wait, Veltas said, his voice rising with alarm. You are planning to attack the enemy forces? The goal is to avoid conflict. The goal is to save the civilians, Foster replied calmly. The fastest way to do that is to neutralize the threat. What happened next left the Zephyrians speechless. The human crew completed the rescue mission in 18 minutes. They disabled the enemy ships with precise attacks, cleared safe paths through the asteroids with controlled explosions, and evacuated all civilians with military efficiency. No, one died in the simulation. But the Zephyrians watched in stunned silence as the humans treated combat like a routine procedure. They showed no hesitation, no fear, and no doubt about using violence to solve the problem quickly. How did you do that so fast? Ithara whispered. Practice, Sullivan said simply. We train for situations like this all the time. But the violence, Veltas said, his voice shaking. You destroyed their weapon systems without hesitation. You used explosives in the asteroid field. You could have hurt innocent people. But we didn't, Amy Chen pointed out. We calculated every shot, every explosion. We knew exactly what would happen before we acted. This is what frightens us, Council Leader Nithara said quietly. You make violence look easy. You turn destruction into an art form. How do we know you won't use these skills against us someday? The room fell silent. Sullivan could see the fear in every Zephyrian face. They had asked for a demonstration, and his crew had given them exactly what they requested. But seeing human military capabilities in action had made their fears worse, not better. Because, Sullivan said finally, we only fight people who hurt innocent others. You're not our enemies. You're not trying to conquer anyone or steal anything or hurt civilians. Why would we fight you? But what if we disagreed about something important? Vextal asked. What if our peoples wanted the same thing and couldn't share it? Would you use your weapons against us then? Sullivan thought about the question carefully. It was the heart of their fear, and he needed to answer it honestly. We would talk first, just like you do, he said. We would negotiate and compromise and find solutions that work for everyone. But if talking failed, and if you tried to take something by force or hurt our people, then yes, we would fight back. The Zephyrians looked at each other with expressions of deep concern. They had their answer, and it wasn't the one they had hoped to hear. We need time to discuss this among our people, Nithara said finally. This meeting is adjourned. As the Zephyrians filed out of the room, Sullivan wondered if humanity had just lost its chance at making alien friends. His crew had been honest about their capabilities, but honesty might have cost them everything. Captain Sullivan was eating breakfast in his quarters when the alarms began screaming throughout Peaceful Harbor Station. The sound was different from any human alarm he had ever heard. It was a soft, musical tone that somehow managed to convey pure terror. He rushed to the command center where he found Fleet Leader Vextal staring at a display screen with his 4 eyes wide with fear. The other Zephyrians in the room were moving frantically between stations, their usual calm completely gone. What's happening? Sullivan asked. The Korvac Empire, Vextal said without looking away from the screen. They have found us. Sullivan looked at the display and saw dozens of red dots moving toward their position. Military ships, heavily armed, and moving in attack formation. He had heard of the Korvac Empire during his briefings about this region of space. They were conquerors who took worlds by force and enslaved the populations. "How many ships?" Sullivan asked. 57, replied Science Commander Ithara, her musical voice shaking with fear. "They are demanding our immediate surrender. They want this station, our research data, and all civilian populations to be handed over for labor assignments." Sullivan felt his blood run cold. Labor assignments was a polite way of saying slavery. "What are your options?" "We have none," Vextal said quietly. "Our ships are not equipped for combat. We have 12 vessels at this station, but they are exploration and research ships. The Krorvak have conquered 43 worlds in this sector. No one has ever successfully resisted them." "What do you usually do when they threaten you?" "We evacuate," Ithara admitted sadly. "We abandon our colonies and research stations and find new homes elsewhere. It is better than fighting a war we cannot win." Sullivan stared at the tactical display. The Krorvak fleet was massive, but he could see weaknesses in their formation. They were flying in standard conquest patterns, expecting no real resistance. Their ships were spread out, probably to intimidate rather than for tactical efficiency. "How long do we have?" he asked. 6 hours until they reach weapons range, Vextal replied. "We are preparing to evacuate the civilian population, but we cannot save everyone in time. At least 3,000 beings will be captured." Sullivan made a decision that would change everything. "What if you didn't run?" Every Zephyrian in the command center turned to look at him. Their expressions showed confusion and fear. "We cannot fight them," Velta said. "Our weapons are mining tools and research equipment. Their ships are built for war." "But you're not alone," Sullivan said. "The Liberty is still here." The room went silent. Fleet Leader Vextal slowly shook his head. "Captain, your ship is brave, but it is only one vessel against 57. Even humans cannot overcome such odds." "Maybe not," Sullivan admitted, "but we can try. Those civilians you're talking about abandoning, they don't deserve to be slaves. Someone has to stand up to bullies like the Krorvak." Communications Officer Brad Turner appeared in the doorway. "Captain, I've been monitoring Krorvak battle chatter. They're not expecting any resistance. Their commander is treating this like a routine intimidation run." Sullivan turned back to Vextal. "Give me tactical data on their ships. Everything you know about Krorvak military doctrine." "You are serious about this?" Ithara said, her voice filled with amazement. "You would fight 57 ships to protect people you barely know?" "That's what we do," Sullivan said simply. "We fight bullies." Dr. Patricia Wells entered the command center with several Zephyrian scientists. "Captain, we've been working on something. The Zephyrians have amazing technology for peaceful purposes. If we modify their mining equipment and research tools, we might be able to give this station some defensive capabilities." One of the Zephyrian scientists, a young male named Keftar, stepped forward nervously. "We have never used our technology for violence before, but if it could save lives, we are willing to help." Sullivan felt a spark of hope. "What kind of modifications are we talking about?" "Their asteroid mining lasers can be reconfigured as weapons," Patricia explained. "Their cargo transporters can move objects at high speed, maybe fast enough to damage enemy ships. And their research probes could work as missiles if we program them correctly." Fleet Leader Vextal looked horrified. "You want to turn our peaceful tools into instruments of war?" "I want to turn your peaceful tools into instruments of protection," Sullivan corrected. "There's a difference." Engineer Danny Rodriguez joined the group, carrying a datapad filled with technical information. "Captain, I've been studying their shield technology. If we combine it with our tactical knowledge, we might be able to create defensive barriers that could protect the station." "This is insane," Velta said. "We are researchers and explorers, not soldiers." "You don't have to be soldiers," Sullivan replied. "You just have to be willing to defend your home." Navigator Amy Chen appeared with a star chart showing the local system. "Captain, I've found something interesting. The Krorvak are coming through the asteroid field in single-file formation. If we position the Liberty at the narrow passage between those two large asteroids, we can force them to come at us 1 or 2 ships at a time, instead of all at once." Sullivan studied the chart. It was a classic choke point strategy. That could work, but the Liberty would be completely exposed. We'd be taking on their entire fleet with no backup. You would have backup, Vexatal said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him in surprise. If you are willing to risk everything to protect our people, then perhaps it is time for us to learn how to fight. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Zephyrian engineers worked frantically to convert their peaceful technology into defensive weapons. Human crew members taught alien scientists basic military tactics and target identification. The station's research computers were reprogrammed to coordinate defensive systems. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Foster established a command post where he could coordinate the station's new weapons with the Liberty's attack. Commander Helen Price worked with Zephyrian pilots to develop basic combat maneuvers for their lightly armed research ships. I never thought I would see the day when Zephyrians prepared for war, Ithara said as she helped calibrate a converted mining laser. You're not preparing for war, Sullivan told her. You're preparing to defend your home. There's a big difference. As the Korvac fleet drew closer, long-range sensors picked up their communications. The enemy commander was already planning how to divide the captured population among his ships. He was discussing which research facilities to strip and which civilians would make the best workers. They talk about us like we are property to be collected, young Keftar said angrily. It was the first time Sullivan had seen a Zephyrian express real anger. That's what bullies do, Sullivan replied. They see other people as things to be used. But today they're going to learn that some things fight back. Fleet leader Vextal approached Sullivan as the final preparations were completed. Captain, I must ask you something that has been troubling me. Why are you doing this? Your ship could escape easily. You could return to human space and be safe. Why risk your lives for strangers? Sullivan thought about the question for a moment. It was the same thing his crew had been asking themselves. Finally, he found the words to explain. Because if we don't fight them here, they'll just attack someone else tomorrow. Evil succeeds when good people do nothing. My crew and I swore an oath to protect innocent people wherever they are. Vexatal's 4 eyes blinked slowly. I am beginning to understand why humans build ships like yours. You carry weapons not because you love violence, but because you hate bullies more than you fear death. Now you're getting it, Sullivan said with a grim smile. The Korvac fleet was now only 2 hours away. In the command center, alarms began sounding again. But this time, the Zephyrians were not preparing to run. For the first time in their peaceful history, they were preparing to fight. The Korvac fleet appeared on the horizon like a storm cloud of metal and death. Captain Sullivan stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty, positioned between 2 massive asteroids that formed a narrow passage into Zephyrian space. Behind him, Peaceful Harbor Station waited with its newly converted defensive weapons. 57 ships confirmed, reported navigator Amy Chen. They're maintaining standard conquest formation. No signs they suspect any resistance. Communications. Officer Brad Turner looked up from his station. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the Korvac fleet commander. Put it on screen. The main display showed a large reptilian alien with scarred skin and cruel yellow eyes. This was Commander Scarix of the Korvac Empire, a being who had conquered more worlds than most species had even discovered. Unknown vessel. Scarix's voice was harsh and commanding. You are blocking our path to a rightful conquest. Move. Aside immediately or be destroyed with the rest of these weak prey. Sullivan stepped forward, his voice calm and steady. This is Captain Jake Sullivan of the human vessel Liberty. You have 30 seconds to reverse course and leave this system. Scarix stared at the screen for a moment, then threw back his head and laughed. The sound was like breaking glass. One small ship threatens the might of the Korvac Empire. What species are you, human? We have never heard of you. You're about to learn, Sullivan replied. The Korvac commander's expression turned serious. You have spirit? I will give you that. When we capture your ship, I will make you a commander in my fleet. Your crew can serve as warriors instead of slaves. Not interested, Sullivan said. You have 15 seconds left. Destroy them, Scarix ordered, and the transmission ended. The Korvac fleet began moving forward, but they had to come through the asteroid passage in groups of 2 or 3 ships. It was exactly what Sullivan had hoped for. All stations. Battle. Ready, Sullivan commanded. Throughout the Liberty, his crew prepared for the fight of their lives. In the station's command center, Fleet Leader Vextal watched the tactical display with amazement and terror. One human ship against an entire fleet, he whispered. Are they insane or incredibly brave? Both, I think, replied Science Commander Ithara as she operated the station's converted mining laser. The first 3 Korvac ships entered the passage, their weapons charging for what they expected to be an easy kill. Instead, they found themselves facing something they had never encountered before, a human warship in full combat mode. The Liberty opened fire with precision that shocked everyone watching. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Foster coordinated the weapon systems with deadly accuracy. Each shot was calculated and deliberate. The first Korvac ship lost its engines. The second lost its weapon systems. The third tried to retreat, but found its path blocked by disabled ships. Impossible! Scarex roared over the communication channel. How can one ship be so effective? We practice, Sullivan replied calmly. More Korvac ships tried to enter the passage, but the Liberty held its position. Engineer Danny Rodriguez kept the weapons and shields running at maximum efficiency while taking heavy damage. The ship shook with each enemy hit, but it continued fighting. On the station, the Zephyrians watched in amazement as the humans turned combat into an art form. Every movement was purposeful. Every shot had meaning. The crew worked together like parts of a single machine. Their tactical coordination is incredible, young Keftar said, as he helped target the station's defensive weapons. They communicate, without words. Each person knows exactly what the others will do. The battle continued for 20 minutes. The Liberty destroyed or disabled 12 Korvac ships, but it was taking heavy damage. Hull breaches appeared on multiple decks. The shields were failing. Captain, reported Chief Engineer Karen Brooks over the communication system, we can't take much more of this. Main power is down to 30%. Sullivan knew they were running out of time. The Korvac had figured out they could overwhelm the Liberty by sending more ships through the passage at once. Soon they would break through and the station would be defenseless. That was when the Zephyrians surprised everyone, including themselves. This is Fleet Leader Vextal to all Zephyrian vessels. His voice came over the communication channel. The humans are risking their lives to protect our people. It is time we learned what courage means. 12 Zephyrian research and exploration ships moved out from behind the station. They were not built for war, but they had been modified with the converted mining equipment and research tools. More importantly, they carried crews who had finally learned the difference between aggression and protection. The Korvac commander was stunned. The prey species is fighting back? This is impossible. They have never resisted before. What followed was unlike any battle in galactic history. The Zephyrians had no military training, but they had something else. They were fighting for their homes and families. Guided by human tactical advice, they used their superior technology in ways they had never imagined. Ithara's ship used its cargo transporter to hurl asteroids at enemy vessels. Teleth's navigation computer calculated jump coordinates that placed his ship behind surprised Korvac attackers. Keftar's research probes, reprogrammed as missiles, struck with accuracy that amazed even the humans. The tide of battle began to turn. The Korvac found themselves facing not just one determined human crew, but an entire species that had decided to fight for the first time in 2,000 years. This is not possible, Scarex screamed as his ships took heavy losses. They are researchers and explorers, not warriors. Today they're both, Sullivan replied. The final moment came when Scarex's own command ship tried to break through the passage. The Liberty, badly damaged but still fighting, moved to intercept. The two ships exchanged devastating fire at close range. Just as the Liberty's shields finally failed, Vextal's ship appeared alongside the human vessel. The Zephyrian commander had never fired a weapon in anger before, but his modified mining laser struck the Korvac command ship at exactly the right moment. Scarex's ship exploded in a ball of fire and metal. The remaining Korvac fleet, seeing Their commander, destroyed and facing unexpected resistance from a species they had considered harmless, made a decision that would change the balance of power in this region of space. They retreated. "Let this be known throughout the galaxy," came a transmission from one of the fleeing Korvax ships. "The Zephyrian system is protected by the Death World warriors called humans. Do not attack this place unless you wish to face the wrath of beings who make war into an art." In the aftermath of the battle, Captain Sullivan stood in the command center of Peaceful Harbor Station, surrounded by Zephyrian leaders, who looked at him with new understanding. "We owe you a debt we can never repay," Fleet Leader Vextal said. "You risked everything to protect people you barely knew." "That's what friends do," Sullivan replied simply. Science Commander Ithara stepped forward. "We understand now why humans carry weapons among the stars. You are not the aggressors we feared. You are the protectors the galaxy needs." Council Leader Nathara, the elderly Zephyrian who had been most suspicious of humans, approached Sullivan, with tears in her 4 eyes. "We were wrong about your species. We thought violence was always evil. Today we learned that sometimes good people must fight to protect what matters." "Will you stay?" Vextal asked. "Will you help us learn how to defend ourselves?" Sullivan looked around at the aliens who had become allies and friends. "We'll stay as long as you need us. But remember, the best warriors are the ones who only fight when they have no other choice." As the Liberty took its position as the first human ship permanently stationed in Zephyrian space, word spread throughout the galaxy. The peaceful Zephyrians had found protectors in the humans, and the humans had found friends worth protecting. The age of cooperation between species who complemented each other's strengths had begun. The Zephyrians would continue to explore and discover and create. The humans would stand guard against those who would harm the innocent. And in the depths of space, predator species who had grown comfortable attacking the weak began to think twice. Somewhere out there, the Death World warriors were watching, and they had never learned how to ignore a cry for help. The stars had been quiet for 3,000 years. Admiral Kexthar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the endless void through the crystal walls of his bioship. The vessel pulsed gently around him, its living walls breathing with a rhythm older than most civilizations. He was proud of what his people had built across the galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire stretched across 17 worlds, each one a perfect jewel in their crown of conquest. Their ships moved like graceful fish through space, powered by technology that merged flesh and metal into something beautiful and deadly. No other species had ever challenged them. No other species had ever been able to challenge them. Kexthar touched the control surface with his long, crystalline fingers. The ship responded immediately, showing him reports from across the Empire. Trade was flowing smoothly between the core worlds. The mining colonies were producing rare metals on schedule. Everything was as it should be in their perfect galaxy. Soft chime drew his attention to a new report. Scout ships had found another primitive world in the outer rim. The planet was blue and green, orbiting a yellow star. Early scans showed industrial activity, but nothing impressive. Just another young species playing with fire and crude metals. Sub-Commander Velnara, Kexthar called to his second-in-command. "Take a small fleet to investigate this new world. Standard protocols." Velnara bowed her elegant head. "Shall we prepare for integration or elimination?" "Integration, if they show promise. These young species sometimes make useful servants." Kexthar dismissed the matter with a wave. He had seen hundreds of primitive worlds. They were all the same in the end. Far across the galaxy, Captain Jake Murphy was having a very different kind of day. He stood on the bridge of the USS Dakota, a massive ship built in the orbital yards above Mars. The vessel was angular and brutal, covered in thick armor plating and bristling with weapons. It looked like what it was, a machine built for war. "Captain, we're getting strange readings from the outer sensors," reported Lieutenant Amy Foster from her station. "Something big is moving near the edge of the system." Jake moved to look at the displays. The readings were faint but definitely there. Objects moving faster than anything natural, following paths that suggested intelligence behind them. After 15 years of preparation, It looked like first contact was finally happening. "Get me Admiral Rivers on the command channel," Jake ordered, "and start warming up the weapon systems just in case." The Earth Defense Force had been ready for this moment since humanity first developed faster-than-light travel. The governments of Earth had learned from their own bloody history. When humans finally met aliens, they would not be caught defenseless. Admiral Kate Rivers received Jake's report aboard the USS Montana, the newest and most powerful ship in the human fleet. The massive dreadnought was 2 kilometers long, armed with railguns that could punch through a mountain and particle beams hot enough to melt steel. Around her, 300 other ships of various sizes prepared for humanity's first meeting with another intelligent species. "All ships, this is Admiral Rivers," she broadcast to the fleet. "We've waited 15 years for this moment. Remember your training. Hope for peace, but be ready for anything." Commander Lisa Santos checked her systems aboard the USS Liberty, another of Earth's new super dreadnoughts. Her crew was nervous, but ready. They had all grown up hearing stories about humanity's wars, about how their species had nearly destroyed itself before finally learning to work together. Now they would find out if that hard-won wisdom would serve them among the stars. The human fleet moved into formation as the alien contacts grew stronger on their sensors. Earth's factories had been working without rest for years, building ships and weapons based on lessons learned from centuries of human conflict. Every vessel carried the hopes and fears of 8 billion people who had never seen an alien face. Meanwhile, Sub-Commander Velnara's scout fleet approached the strange system with casual confidence. Her bioships were works of art, grown rather, then built, shaped by genetic engineering perfected over millennia. The 5 vessels moved in perfect harmony, their crystal hulls catching the light of the local star. "Initial scans complete," reported her sensor officer. "The third planet shows signs of industrial civilization. Crude metal constructions in orbit, primitive chemical rockets. They appear to be at the early stages of space travel." Velnara nodded. It was exactly what she had expected. Another young species taking its first stumbling steps beyond its home world. They would be frightened when they saw the Zephyrian ships, but that was normal. Fear was often the beginning of wisdom. "Prepare the standard integration protocols," she ordered. "Begin with a demonstration of our superiority, then offer them the chance to join the Empire as a client species." Her communications officer activated the translation systems and began preparing the message that had been used successfully on dozens of other worlds. The pattern was always the same. Show overwhelming force, demand submission, then guide the new species into their proper place in the galactic order. Neither fleet fully understood what they were about to encounter. The Zephyrians had never met a species that could match their technology or resist their expansion. They had ruled the galaxy for so long that the idea of serious opposition seemed impossible. The humans had no idea they were about to face an empire that had conquered star systems while Earth was still recovering from its last ice age. They only knew that alien ships were approaching their home, and they would defend it with everything they had. The stage was set for a meeting that would change the galaxy forever. 2 very different civilizations, each confident in their own strength, moved toward a collision that neither could fully imagine. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath as the distance between the fleets slowly closed. Sub-Commander Velnara watched the primitive metal ships grow larger on her screens. The human vessels looked crude and ugly to her eyes, all sharp angles and thick armor plating. They reminded her of the ancient war machines her people had abandoned thousands of years ago when they learned to grow their ships instead of building them. "How many vessels are we detecting?" she asked her sensor officer. "Approximately 50 ships in the immediate area, Sub-Commander. More are arriving from deeper in the system. Their largest vessels appear to be roughly 2,000 meters in length." Velnara was mildly impressed. Most primitive species could barely manage a few hundred meters for their largest constructions. These creatures showed more promise than usual. Perhaps they would make useful additions to the Empire after all. "Open a communication channel," she ordered. "Standard integration protocol." The message that transmitted across space had been crafted by Zephyrian diplomats over centuries of successful conquests. It was designed to be simple and clear. easily understood by even the most primitive minds. The translation computer would handle the language barriers. Primitive species of the third planet, the message began. You have been selected for integration into the Zephyrian Empire. Cease all military activities immediately and prepare to receive our representatives. Resistance will result in the complete destruction of your civilization. You have one of your planetary rotations to comply. Captain Jake Murphy stared at the translation that appeared on his screen. Around him, the bridge of the USS Dakota fell silent as the crew absorbed the alien ultimatum. The first words from another intelligent species in the universe, and they were a demand for surrender. Sir, Lieutenant Amy Foster said quietly, are they seriously threatening to destroy our entire civilization? Jake nodded grimly. Looks that way. Get me Admiral Rivers immediately. Aboard the USS Montana, Admiral Kate Rivers read the alien message with growing anger. She had hoped for peaceful contact, but these creatures seemed to think humanity would simply roll over and accept slavery. They had badly misjudged the species they were dealing with. All ships, battle stations, she broadcast to the fleet. Weapons free. If they want to fight, we'll give them one they'll never forget. The human fleet began to spread out into combat formation. Destroyers and cruisers moved to flanking positions while the massive dreadnoughts formed the center line. Gunports opened, along the hulls of hundreds of ships, revealing the weapons that humanity had spent 15 years perfecting. Subcommander Velnara frowned as she watched the primitive vessels begin to maneuver. Their movements were actually quite sophisticated, showing a level of tactical thinking she had not expected. Perhaps they needed a more dramatic demonstration of Zephyrian superiority. Target their largest vessel, she commanded. Fire a warning. Shot across their formation. Not close enough to damage them, but close enough to show them what our weapons can do. The Zephyrian bioships began to glow as their organic weapon systems charged. Crystalline projectiles formed in the living chambers, deep within each vessel. Shaped by genetic processes that had been refined over millennia, the projectiles were beautiful things, clear as diamonds and sharp as razors, designed to slice through enemy hulls with surgical precision. 5 streams of crystal death lanced across space toward the human fleet. They were aimed to pass just ahead of the largest human ship, a demonstration shot that would surely terrify the primitives into submission. Captain Steve Collins watched from the bridge of the destroyer USS Phoenix as the alien weapons fire streaked toward Admiral Rivers' flagship. The projectiles were moving fast, but not faster than human sensors could track. More importantly, they looked like a direct attack on the fleet commander. All weapons open fire, Collins shouted. Protect the flagship. The standing orders were clear. Any hostile action against the fleet would be met with immediate and overwhelming retaliation. Collins did not hesitate to pull the trigger on humanity's first interstellar war. The USS Phoenix opened fire with everything it had. Railgun rounds accelerated to tremendous speeds, particle beams hot enough to boil metal, and nuclear-tipped torpedoes that could crack asteroids. Other human ships followed suit, filling space with a storm of deadly energy and metal. Velnara had exactly 3 seconds to realize her mistake before the human weapons reached her ship. The warning shots she had fired were being interpreted as a direct attack. The primitive species was not cowering in fear. They were fighting back with a fury that defied all her expectations. The first railgun rounds punched through her bioship's hull like it was made of paper. The crystalline structure that had seemed so elegant and strong crumpled under the impact of simple kinetic energy, delivered at impossible speeds. Atmosphere rushed out through dozens of holes as her beautiful vessel began to die around her. Impossible, she whispered as her ship's living systems began to shut down. They are primitives. How can they hurt us? The answer came in the form of a particle beam that sliced her flagship in half. The other 4 ships in her scout fleet lasted only seconds longer, before they too were reduced to glowing debris scattered across the void. Admiral Kate Rivers watched the alien vessels disintegrate with mixed feelings. The immediate threat was over, but this was clearly just the beginning. These aliens had threatened to destroy all of humanity. They would not take this defeat quietly. Secure the area and begin salvage operations, she ordered. Get our science teams out here to examine the wreckage. We need to learn everything we can about their technology. Captain Amy Foster coordinated the cleanup from the USS Virginia, one of the newer super dreadnoughts that had arrived as reinforcements. The alien ships were unlike anything human engineers had ever seen. They appeared to be grown rather than built, using some kind of biological technology that was completely foreign to human understanding. "Admiral," she reported, "we're detecting some kind of transmission from the wreckage. It looks like a distress signal heading back toward alien space." Rivers nodded grimly. The surviving aliens would know exactly what had happened here. Humanity had just announced its presence to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible, by destroying the ships of what was clearly a much older and more advanced civilization. "All ships return to Earth immediately," she commanded. "We need to prepare for whatever's coming next." The first battle was over, but both sides knew it was only the beginning. Somewhere in the depths of space, the Zephyrian Empire was learning that they were no longer alone in the galaxy, and they were not going to be happy about it. The emergency message reached Admiral Kexthar's flagship 3 days after the destruction of Velnara's scout fleet. He read the transmission twice before the impossible words finally sank into his mind. 5 Zephyrian bioships destroyed. Completely annihilated. By primitives using crude kinetic weapons. "This cannot be accurate," he said to his communications officer. "Run a full analysis of the transmission, check for corruption or interference." The officer worked frantically at his station for several minutes before looking up with fear in his eyes. "The message is genuine, Admiral. Our ships were destroyed by the primitive species, all hands lost." Kexthar felt something he had never experienced before in his 3 centuries of life. For the first time in Zephyrian history, their ships had been defeated in battle. Not damaged or disabled, but completely destroyed by a species they had dismissed as barely intelligent. "Send word to all fleet commanders," he ordered, his voice cold with rage. "I want every available ship assembled for immediate departure. We will show these creatures what happens when they dare to resist the Empire." The largest fleet in Zephyrian history began to gather at the edge of their space. Over 1,000 bioships of every class, from small scouts to massive battle cruisers that could destroy entire planets. The pride of the Empire demanded nothing less than the complete extermination of the species that had dared to spill Zephyrian blood. Meanwhile, Earth was preparing for war with the desperate efficiency that had carried humanity through its darkest hours. General Paul Martinez stood in the command center buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, watching status reports flow in from across the solar system. "How many ships do we have operational?" he asked his aide. 512. "Vessels of all classes, General. The Mars shipyards are working around the clock to finish the ships still under construction, but we need at least another month." Martinez nodded grimly. The intelligence teams had been studying the wreckage of the alien scout ships, and what they had learned was both fascinating and terrifying. The aliens possessed technology that was thousands of years ahead of humanity in some areas, but they had apparently never developed the kind of heavy weapons that humans took for granted. "What about the defensive platforms?" "Installation is proceeding on schedule. We should have the asteroid belt fully weaponized within 2 weeks." The plan was simple but desperate. Earth's entire industrial capacity had been converted to war production. Automated factories throughout the solar system were churning out weapons, ammunition, and defensive systems at a rate that would have been impossible for any previous generation of humans to imagine. Captain Amy Foster watched the construction efforts from the bridge of the USS Virginia, one of the newest super dreadnoughts to roll out of the Martian shipyards. The massive vessel was over 2 kilometers long and armed with enough firepower to level a small country. Around her, dozens of similar ships were conducting final training exercises before the alien fleet arrived. "Captain," her weapons officer reported, "we're detecting movement at the edge of sensor range. Something big is coming." Foster felt her heart skip a beat. Long-range sensors had been tracking the approaching alien fleet for days, but this was the first time they had appeared. On short-range detection, the enemy was finally here. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "All ships to battle stations, this is it." Admiral Kate Rivers received the alert aboard the USS Montana as the human fleet moved into defensive formation around Earth's moon. The plan was to use Luna's gravity well as a tactical advantage, forcing the aliens to approach through carefully prepared kill zones where human weapons would have maximum effect. "How many ships are we looking at?" she asked her sensor officer. "Still counting, Admiral. At least 800 confirmed contacts, possibly more. They're maintaining perfect formation at long range." Rivers felt a chill run down her spine. 800 ships against humanity's 500. The odds were bad, but not impossible. Earth's weapons had proven effective against alien technology, and human tactics were designed around fighting superior numbers. "All ships, prepare to execute Plan Delta," she broadcast to the fleet. "Remember, we're not just fighting for Earth, we're fighting for the future of our species." The alien fleet dropped out of hyperspace in a display that would have intimidated any other species in the galaxy. Over 1,000 bioships appeared simultaneously, their crystalline hulls gleaming in the light of Earth's sun. They moved, in perfect synchronization, like a vast school of predatory fish closing in on their prey. Admiral Kexthar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the crude human vessels scramble into defensive positions. The primitives had managed to destroy one small scout fleet through luck and treachery, but now they faced the full might of the Zephyrian Empire. "Begin the attack," he commanded. "I want every ship destroyed and every world in this system reduced to ash. These creatures will serve as an example to any other species that might consider resistance." The bioships began to accelerate toward Earth, their organic weapon systems charging for the battle that would determine the fate of humanity. Behind them, the vast emptiness of space seemed to hold its breath as two civilizations prepared to fight for the right to exist. Captain Steve Collins watched the approaching armada from the bridge of the USS Phoenix, one of the destroyers assigned, to the outer defense perimeter. The alien ships were beautiful in their own way, but he felt no admiration for their elegant design. They had come to destroy his home, and he would die before letting that happen. "All weapons ready, Captain," his tactical officer reported. Collins nodded, his hand resting on the firing controls. Around him, the crew of the Phoenix prepared to face impossible odds with the same courage that had carried humanity through countless wars against their own kind. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they were fighting for their families, their planet, and their species. The Battle of Luna was about to begin. The Battle of Luna began with a sight that had never been seen before in the galaxy. Over 1,000 alien bioships swept toward Earth in perfect formation, their crystalline hulls catching the sunlight like a swarm of deadly jewels. Admiral Kexthar watched from his flagship as the primitive human vessels appeared to retreat toward their home planet. "They are running," he said with satisfaction. "As expected. No species has ever stood against the full might of the Empire." His tactical officer nodded eagerly. "Shall we pursue them into the gravity well, Admiral? We can end this quickly." Kexthar smiled coldly. "Yes. Follow them to their world. I want to see the fear in their eyes when they realize how hopeless their situation truly is." The Zephyrian fleet accelerated toward Earth, drawn deeper into the solar system by what appeared to be a panicked human retreat. The bioships moved like living creatures through space, their organic systems responding to their pilots' thoughts with fluid grace. Aboard the USS Montana, Admiral Kate Rivers watched the alien fleet take the bait. The human withdrawal was perfectly calculated, designed to draw the enemy into the trap that Earth's engineers had spent weeks preparing. Hidden throughout the asteroid belt, automated weapon platforms waited in silence for their moment to strike. "Distance to activation point?" she asked her tactical officer. 60,000 kilometers in closing, Admiral. All platforms are armed and ready." Rivers felt her heart pounding as the enemy fleet drew closer to the invisible line that would trigger humanity's desperate gamble. The aliens had superior numbers and technology, but they had never faced an opponent who understood the true meaning of total war. "All ships prepare for Operation Sledgehammer," she broadcast to the human fleet. "Remember, we only get one chance at this." The moment came when the lead alien ships crossed into the asteroid belt. Suddenly, the space around them erupted in fire as hundreds of hidden weapon platforms activated simultaneously. Railgun rounds and particle beams lanced out from concealed positions among the asteroids, catching the Zephyrian fleet in a devastating crossfire. Admiral Kexthar watched, in shock as his beautiful ships began to die around him. The asteroids themselves were armed, turning the entire belt into one massive weapon system. Bioships that had ruled the galaxy for millennia were torn apart by simple kinetic rounds fired from hidden positions. "Impossible," he screamed. How did they weaponize an entire asteroid field? His communications officer was frantically trying to coordinate a response, but the human trap was too well planned. Every time the Zephyrian ships tried to maneuver away from one group of platforms, they exposed themselves to fire from another direction. Captain Steve Collins led his squadron of destroyers in a flanking attack, using the confusion created by the asteroid platforms to strike at the alien fleet's exposed rear. The USS Phoenix and her sister ships emerged from behind Luna like wolves attacking a scattered herd. "All weapons continuous fire," Collins ordered. "Don't give them time to regroup." The human destroyers opened up with everything they had, their weapons designed for the kind of close-range combat that had dominated Earth's naval battles for centuries. The aliens had never encountered such brutal, straightforward tactics, and their elegant formations began to collapse under the assault. Captain Amy Foster brought the USS Virginia into the heart of the battle, her super dreadnought's massive guns targeting the largest alien vessels. The ship's main battery could fire rounds the size of small buildings, and each shot tore through enemy hulls like they were made of paper. "Target their flagship," she commanded. "Let's cut the head off this snake." The Virginia's guns swiveled toward Admiral Kexthar's bioship, the massive vessel that served as the command center for the entire alien fleet. The first salvo missed, but the second found its mark, punching through the crystalline hull and into the ship's vital organs. Kexthar felt his flagship dying around him as human weapons tore through its living structure. The bioship's pain echoed in his mind through the neural link that connected all Zephyrian vessels to their crews. For the first time in his long life, he understood what it meant to be truly afraid. "All ships, retreat," he ordered desperately. "Fall back to hyperspace." But the human trap was complete. As the surviving alien ships tried to escape, they found their path blocked by fresh human reinforcements arriving from the outer planets. The Mars shipyards had been working without rest, and Admiral Rivers had timed their arrival perfectly. Captain Jake Murphy led the reinforcement fleet aboard the USS Dakota, his battle-scarred cruiser accompanied by dozens of newly constructed warships. The fresh human vessels fell upon the retreating aliens like hungry sharks, their weapon systems still warm from the factory floors. "No survivors," Murphy broadcast to his fleet. "These things came here to destroy our world. We make sure they never get the chance to try again." The slaughter that followed would be remembered as one of the most decisive battles in galactic history. The Zephyrian Empire's greatest fleet was torn apart piece by piece, their elegant bioships reduced to glowing debris that would drift through the solar system for decades to come. Admiral Kexthar's flagship was among the last to die. As human, particle beams finally breached his ship's core. The proud alien commander had just enough time to send a final message to his homeworlds. The transmission was brief and filled with disbelief. "The primitives have won," he whispered into his communicator. "The Empire is doomed." The message would reach Zephyrian space 3 days later, carrying news that would shatter a civilization that had believed itself invincible. In the span of a few hours, humanity had destroyed the largest fleet in alien history, and proven that the galaxy had a new dominant species. As the last alien ship exploded in the cold vacuum of space, Admiral Kate Rivers allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Earth was safe, but she knew this victory was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, and humanity had made enemies of every species that had served the Zephyrian Empire. The real war was just beginning. 6 months after the Battle of Luna, Captain Jake Murphy stood on the observation deck of the USS Dakota as it patrolled the former Zephyrian trade routes. The space that had once been filled with elegant alien bioships now hosted the angular forms of human vessels, their hulls scarred from battle but victorious. The Zephyrian Empire had collapsed completely after news of their fleet's destruction spread across the galaxy. Without their military might to enforce order, The 17 core worlds had descended into chaos. Some had surrendered immediately to advancing human forces, while others had simply gone silent, their populations fleeing into the outer rim territories. Captain, Lieutenant Amy Foster reported from the communications station. We're receiving a surrender offer from the Zephyrian colony on Kepler 442b. They're asking for protection from local rebel groups. Murphy nodded grimly. It was the same story on dozens of worlds. The alien empire had ruled through fear and superior technology, but when that technology proved useless against human weapons, their entire civilization had crumbled like a house built on sand. Accept their surrender and dispatch a peacekeeping force, he ordered. Make it clear that we're not here as conquerors, we're here to restore order. Admiral Lisa Santos reviewed similar reports from her flagship, the USS Liberty, now the command vessel for what had become known as the Terran Federation Fleet. The massive super dreadnought orbited a former Zephyrian world where human engineers were helping local populations rebuild their infrastructure. The collapse of the empire had revealed the true scope of Zephyrian oppression. For 3,000 years, they had enslaved dozens of species across hundreds of worlds, using their advanced technology to crush any attempt at rebellion. Now, with their masters gone, these enslaved peoples were tasting freedom for the first time in millennia. Admiral, her aide reported, the Kronar delegation has agreed to join the Federation. They're offering to share their mining technology in exchange for military protection. Santos smiled. The Kronar were a reptilian species that had been forced to work in Zephyrian crystal mines for over 2,000 years. Their knowledge of alien technology was proving invaluable as humanity tried to understand the vast empire they had inherited. Excellent. What about the Vextai? Still undecided. They're grateful for their freedom, but they're not sure they want to accept human leadership. Can't say I blame them. The Vextai were an insectoid species with highly advanced mathematical abilities. They had been used by the Zephyrians as living computers, forced to calculate hyperspace routes and manage trade logistics. After so many centuries of slavery, it was understandable that they would be suspicious of any new authority. General Paul Martinez faced similar challenges from his headquarters on Earth, now serving as the first Galactic Defense Coordinator. The title still felt strange to him, but someone had to manage the transition from a human solar system to a galactic civilization spanning hundreds of worlds. Status report on the Colonial Establishment Program, he requested from his staff. Proceeding. Ahead of schedule, General. We have functional colonies on 47 former Zephyrian worlds, with more being established every week. The biggest challenge is finding enough qualified administrators. Martinez chuckled despite himself. Humanity had gone from a single-world species to masters of a galactic empire in less than a year. The learning curve was steep, but humans had always been good at adapting to impossible situations. The industrial capacity that had won the war was now being converted to peaceful purposes. The same shipyards that had produced dreadnoughts were now building exploration vessels and colony ships. The factories that had manufactured weapons were producing construction equipment and agricultural machinery. Captain Amy Foster commanded one of the new exploration vessels, the USS Discovery, as it charted systems that had been off-limits during Zephyrian rule. Her mission was to make contact with species that had hidden from the Empire for centuries, offering them the chance to join the growing Federation. Captain, we're detecting artificial structures in the next system, her science officer reported. Looks like a space station of unknown design. Foster felt the familiar thrill of discovery that had driven humanity to the stars. Every system they explored revealed new wonders, new species with their own unique technologies and cultures. The galaxy was far more diverse and interesting than the Zephyrians had ever allowed anyone to know. Take us in slowly, she ordered. Full diplomatic protocols. Let's see who our new neighbors are. The space station belonged to a species called the Quillen, a race of energy beings who had been hiding in the outer rim for over 1,000 years. When Zephyrian scouts had first found their world, the Quillen had used their mastery of electromagnetic fields to make their entire solar system appear empty and lifeless. You are the humans, the Quillen ambassador said, when contact was finally established. We have heard of your victory over the crystal tyrants, Many species speak of you with hope. Foster smiled as she realized how much the galaxy had changed. Species that had lived in fear for millennia were now emerging from hiding, eager to be part of a new galactic community based on cooperation rather than domination. Back on Earth, children who had been born during the war were now taking their first steps. They would grow up in a galaxy where humanity was not alone, where the stars held friends as well as mysteries. The generation that had fought the Zephyrians had secured not just Earth's freedom, but the freedom of countless other worlds. Admiral Kate Rivers, now retired from active duty, often stood in her garden and looked up at the night sky. The stars no longer seemed cold and distant. They were filled with human ships and human colonies, with alien allies and new friends. Humanity had learned to reach beyond their own world without losing what made them human. The galaxy that had once trembled under Zephyrian rule now looked to Earth for guidance, not because humans were the strongest or most advanced species, but because they had proven something that no other civilization had managed in 3,000 years. They had shown that cooperation could triumph over oppression, that diversity was stronger than uniformity. The age of human expansion had begun, and the stars themselves seemed brighter for it.